You're listening to the Reds Podcast.
This is episode number 67. We're talking about a new book. It's called The 7-Day Startup You Don't Learn Until You Launch. Is it possible to launch a business within 7 days? That's what we're going to talk about on this episode of the Red Podcast.
This is the Red Podcast. Real entrepreneur development. Make more money, work less, and live a life of freedom. No BS advice that really works. Here's your hosts, David Hooper and Laurel Staples.
I had an experience this morning that a lot of people experience on a daily basis, but it's rare for me. I had to take my parents to the airport. It just so happened to be rush hour. And beyond that, because that's bad enough, Nashville, bedroom community, everybody coming into the city. It's like a parking lot out there. But it was raining, made it even worse. It's treacherous. It was raining so hard, in fact, that I couldn't even hear the radio. And it's rededicated me, Laurel, to Red Podcast listeners, many of whom may be listening to this in the car right now.
Every time I have to go out in rush hour traffic, I thank God that I don't have to normally go out in rush hour traffic, that my commute from the bedroom to the office is all I have to do down the hall.
It sucks. It sucks. And not only do you have to do it every day, you've got to get back to where you were. So you've got to do it twice a day.
That's what always got me when I worked a corporate job is morning, it was okay because I wasn't too thrilled to get to work. So the more traffic, it was like, okay. But then like going home, I desperately wanted to get home. And some days it would take me 45 minutes just to get the couple miles from my work to my apartment. And it was awful. I hated that.
It's awful, but there is a better way. This is the Red Podcast. We will help you with that better way. Red stands for Real Entrepreneur Development. We are here to help you get more clients, sell more products, and sell your products profitably, and also build an audience, especially if you're into personality-based marketing, kind of what Laurel and I do. If you're a blogger, writer, author, if you're like Laurel, you're working on Project X, a secret project that nobody knows about right now. We are here to help you. And this book that we're going to talk about today, Laurel, it's called The 7-Day Startup. You Don't Learn Until You Launch. You're using kind of these same strategies, even though we didn't know about this book until a couple days ago. You're using these strategies to launch. That's why I thought it would be good to talk about some of the big ideas from this book. Again, it's called The 7-Day Startup. You Don't Learn Until You Launch. Dan Norris is the author. And if you go to redpodcast.com/67, we've got episode notes from this episode. We've also got a link to that book there that you can check out.
How many times do you see or hear about entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs that have an idea, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, but they had the idea like 5-10 years ago and they haven't done anything about it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, all the time. And I see it a lot just coming from my work in the music industry. People will say, you know, I had this idea for a song, and somebody took that same idea, and now it's a number one hit. And the same thing happens with ideas for businesses as well. If you wait on something too long, eventually that idea is going to come around again.
Oh, somebody else is going to do it.
Yes. Well, Stephen Pressfield would say that you're pissing off the muse, and the muse is giving that idea to somebody else.
I hadn't heard that. That's pretty amusing, though. But I think that's what a lot of people do is they have an idea, they think it's a great idea, and for whatever reason, whether it's fear, procrastination, resistance, like Stephen Pressfield might say, they don't act on the idea. And this book is saying, look, it's time to get that idea out. It's time to launch it and see what happens.
So the book, The 7-Day Startup, You Don't Learn Until You Launch, as the name would suggest, gives you advice on how to get something going within 7 days. And we're going to talk about some of the big ideas here. The first one being base decisions on real customer behavior, not assumptions. And I love this because having worked in accelerators as a mentor, just watching Shark Tank, you see so many people that come to you asking for money or wanting help, and they have all these assumptions, none of which have been tested.
I went to a talk the other day and the guy was talking about design thinking. Have you heard of that, David? I hadn't heard of it.
I have,
Okay.
but only from you.
I hadn't heard of it before, but it was really interesting what he was talking about. What his company was based on is helping other companies do design thinking. And that's just what it was, is basing your products or the updates of your products or what you're putting out into the world and selling, basing it on your customers and their feedback and not just assumptions that you make. For instance, they work with Bridgestone. So if Bridgestone wants to come out with a new kind of tire or new product or something like that, I'm not quite sure the expanse of what Bridgestone does, but instead of saying, okay, well, I think that our customers need this, or I think this, they're actually going to go out in the community, talk to their customers, like have an in-depth, deep conversation with them, not do a survey, not get mass data, but really have an empathetic conversation to figure out what does the customer really need. And this sounds so logical. Yeah, talk to your customer, but so many companies aren't doing that. So I really think this piece of advice should be and can be used by every entrepreneur. If you are selling something, you need to be speaking directly with your customers.
Well, and beyond that, and I think this is the point of the 7-day startup, is sometimes your customers will say one thing, but their behavior is totally different. For example, if I ask somebody, say, hey, how come you bought that SUV? They'll say, oh, it's safe. It's safe. I feel safe. But we know from real data why people actually buy SUVs, and it's not because of safety. In fact, SUVs are not safer than your standard automobile. They're more dangerous because of rollovers and other aspects. But what we say is not always what we do, certainly when it comes to spending money. I mean, how many times have people told you, oh yeah, I'd pay money for that, and then you launch a product, nobody's buying.
Yeah, I think that happens all the time. And that's why you really have to understand what your customers are doing and not just what they're talking about.
When you hear the title 7-Day Startup, you're thinking 7 days to launch. That is insane. But it's worth saying that with this book, The 7-Day Startup, he is talking about 7 days to launch. He's not talking about the grand vision. This isn't the finished building that you've got. You're just getting a viable product, your little structure that you can live in, not the skyscraper that you eventually want to have.
Have you ever launched anything in 7 days, David?
Yeah, I have. I think it's fun to do. I think it's easy to do with an information product. I think it's great to do with a seminar. I think it's great to do with something like we would do, like a podcast, for example. Pretty easy to launch. You can get something out there. And if you've got the minimum skill set and you've got an idea already and you want to just put something up online and get the distribution going through an online means, I think 7 days is totally doable. It's a little bit different. We talked on here before about your retail store. You had to go with a commercial real estate agent. You had to find a good location. You had to research it. I don't know that that could be done in 7 days, but there were probably aspects of that that could have been done within 7 days. And that's what he's talking about. 7 days to launch. You can fix and add to things as you go. It's possible.
I think for me, I have to be honest here, is that I've actually started building in a 7-day delay time from the idea, if I have an idea for a new business or a new product, to actually starting working on that idea. Because most of the time, like back in the day when I first started out, I would come up with an idea and I would create a rapid prototype and I would put it out there and I wouldn't think it all the way through. So I would say that I think rapid prototyping and putting out something quickly while you're excited about it is something good, but I also think building in a delay time to make sure you are on the right path and it's not just hype in your brain.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that as you have done this more and more times, you can get better at that, fine-tune, knowing whether or not it's a good idea, whether or not it's a bad idea. But again, to take it back to the number one thing that we mentioned here, base decisions on real customer behavior, not assumptions. The only way to really know if something is going to work, it is to pull the trigger. Let's go back to Project X just for a minute, Laurel. We haven't announced this to the world, but it's coming soon. But we will announce this, is that the way you are launching this is via Kickstarter, and part of that is the testing. Part of it is basing what feedback you get on real behavior, not what people say. You're actually asking for money. If the money comes in, you're able to push forward. Or if it doesn't come in, you can decide whether or not to push forward. And that project more or less has been pretty quick. Once you decided to go, you pulled the trigger on it, you got the partnership in order, the money in order, and everything is ready to go. So I don't think that you're not doing that, but I agree with you about having to delay before you get going. It can make it better when you do get going because of the clarity that you've got. You can go full speed ahead at that point.
I think there's a balance. Is you want to wait enough time that you know that it's a good idea to go forward with, it's what you're really passionate about, all that kind of stuff, but you don't want to wait too much time. That's where the procrastination, fear, resistance starts playing in, and you might as well just get it out there. Yeah. And I like that you mentioned Kickstarter, David, because Kickstarter, I feel like if you want to do a 7-day startup, I feel like Kickstarter is the way to go, because you can test your prototype and you can do pre-sales and see if anyone's interested. And if they're not interested, don't think after you launch they're magically going to be interested in what you do. People are putting their money where their mouth is on that platform. And that's why I'm going that route, to really test the vision.
It's a great way to test it. And also just the nature of Kickstarter. In order to get the money, you've got to be clear and you've got to think through this process. It forces you to do that, or else you're not going to get the money at all.
I think one thing with launching in 7 days, and this is something that I would worry about too, is you can fix things as you go along the way. And I think he has a really good point. It's like, put it out there, fix it along the way. It doesn't have to be your grand vision. But what do you think about making a bad first impression, David?
It's for real. The struggle is real.
The struggle is real.
You can make a bad first impression, but I think that it is probably an overblown fear. It's like, all guys will relate to this. You see the beautiful woman in the club and you think, should I ask her out, or should I just, and you kind of go through this thinking process. Should I or shouldn't I? And you think that if you go over to her, everybody's going to watch you go over there and get rejected, assuming she rejects you. And that's just not the case. It's possible to fail and still recover and eventually get the date, run the business, make the money, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. So I think you can make a poor first impression. And I think if you do some of the stuff that we've talked about here on the other episodes of the podcast to make a good first impression, we've got a whole episode on that. That is going to help you to recover, or to actually not even have to recover, but to lay it down the very first time around.
Absolutely. Our episode on making a good first impression was episode 34. So if you want to go back and listen to that, it is redpodcast.com/34 and check that out.
In his book, Dan lists 9 elements of a bootstrapped business idea. We're not going to go over all 9. We don't have time to do that, but we will cover a few of them. I think they definitely fit with what we're talking about here. We talk about freedom businesses, doing something that you love to do, something that you want to do. Of course, you want it to provide for you because it is a business and you do have to, as we say, make a living. But the number one element he talks about here is enjoyable tasks daily. Very important, and I completely agree with him on that. If you don't like what you're doing, why do it?
This has been something that's played a role for me since I got started as an entrepreneur. Is I like to set up my businesses around what I like to do, and I like to delegate other stuff. And I think that's the point in my mind of being a business owner, is being able to have the freedom to do what you want to do and have the freedom in your time to set your own schedule and all of that. And having enjoyable tasks that you're doing makes that possible. Is every task enjoyable? No, not necessarily, but you do want to build those into your day.
He talks about a product founder fit, which I think is also essential. I see a lot of guys, they just chase the money. And that to me is completely ridiculous. I think you've done this really well with Project X. Your co-founder on this, she is in the market. She's working in the category right now. She's not only somebody who works there, but she's somebody who uses the category. When you go out with her, she gets a Project X type product, little bitty product, $60, $70, $80 a pop. and she knows it inside and out. She is made for this, and that's why you brought her on. You want to be there. You want your partners to be there, just like that.
We're going to have to announce what my business is so we stop having to say Project X. This is really critical, though. And again, something that I've factored into all of the businesses that I've started over the years is looking at what am I excited about? What am I passionate about? Because if you're trying to sell something that you are not excited about, your customer base or your clients are going to pick up on that. And they're not going to be excited about it if you're not excited about it. And that's why chasing the money and trying to sell something just because you think it's going to make you money is generally not a good strategy, because people pick up on the energy that you put around your product. And if you're just in it to make money and little else, you're not going to get very far. Some people do, but it's unlikely.
Well, you can make money, but money is something that you are forever going to chase. I know a lot of people that have made a lot of money. Not all of them are happy. If you think that money is going to make you happy, you have to start happiness where you are right now. It is possible. Don't know where you are, but believe me, it's possible. I've never seen it fail. And money is just going to make you more of the person that you are now. If you're happy now, sure, it's going to make you happy. If you're not happy, it's not going to help with that. Dan has 3 rules here that I disagree with, and I'm curious to know what you think about these. He says, and these are, again, 9 elements of a bootstrapped business. He says scalability is one of those. I disagree with that. I think if you don't want to scale it, it's your business and you don't have to scale.
I agree with you. I think it depends on the person, on the business owner. I know 2 people that I've talked to recently in Nashville. One of them runs a company called Stoked, which was the design thinking guy. Another runs a company called The Skillery in Nashville. And both of those guys don't want to scale their business. For instance, the Skillery is a co-working space, but he also does classes that he lists online and people do in person. And he was in an accelerator program. I
was actually a mentor in that accelerator when he went through it.
Yeah, exactly. And so he decided through going through that, like they're all talking about scalability. You got to be able to scale this and bring it to different cities and expand on your model and everything like that. And he just decided, look, that doesn't excite me. To have this same platform in Atlanta, in New York, in other cities. It's just not exciting. So he decided not to scale. And same with the gentleman who runs Stoked. He has a great business. He says he turns away just as much business as he takes. I mean, he's got clients coming to him all the time, but he's like, look, I got a great team. I got a good space. I'm working about 20, 25 hours a week, and I'm happy doing that. It's paying the bills and I get to do everything I want to do. So I think scalability can be good. I don't think it's something to ignore, but is it right for you? You have to make that decision for yourself.
I know a guy who owns a very popular restaurant in Nashville. This thing is line out the door every day of the week. Very, very popular. He had a franchising opportunity. He sold the original restaurant, went into the franchise business, disappeared. And this guy, I'm assuming, is going to pop up with these things everywhere because he was making a killing at this restaurant. About a year later, I see him back in his original location. I said, what's the deal, man? You're back. He said, yeah, I went into the business end, into the franchising end. I didn't like it. I realized I wanted to be here with people, connecting with my customers. So here I am. I bought the restaurant back and no more franchising. So scalability, I think it's a great thing in theory. You mentioned the accelerator. I was in there with the company you mentioned, the Skillery, and watching how the other companies that came through the accelerator were encouraged to scale. A lot of the guys, for them, it took the pleasure out of what they were doing. Some businesses are not meant to scale, and if you have one of those businesses, don't be afraid to say, hey, I'm happy with what I've got right now. I'm happy with the money that I'm making. That is perfectly fine. Laurel and I are more about freedom than we are about money, and the two are not related, although money can buy freedom at times. Next, he talks about operating without a founder. Yes and no. I disagree with that because I work with a lot of personality-based businesses. I'll give you an example. Name any band. Let's talk about Kiss, one of the biggest bands in the world. Well, 2 of their founders aren't even in the band now. 2 of the original guys are there, and the other people have been rotating for the last 20, maybe even 30 years. So do you want to operate without a founder? Is the band more successful when it operates without the founder? Well, look at Kiss. I would argue no. Look at your business, not necessarily. So that's not necessarily something that you want to think about if you're in a personality business, especially. For example, like broadcasting, would Red Podcast be different without me or Laurel? Yes, it would be.
I don't think it would exist.
Probably wouldn't exist because we are Red Podcast, but that's something that we've thought about, and it's something for you to think about. Just because you don't want to operate without a founder does not mean that you've got a business that's not worth something. He also talks about large market potential. This is another thing that I completely disagree with because I think a lot of times people get into a market, let's say weight loss, let's say healthcare, let's say make money from home, or whatever these big markets are. Big markets, yeah, but how do you compete with the big companies that are actually in those markets? How do you compete with soft drinks? You don't try to play Coca-Cola's game. You go with a micro-brewed soft drink. That's how those games are won. And it's not necessarily the large market that you're going after. You're going after a niche market, maybe that fits within a larger market. This is a really, really good book, The 7-Day Startup. You don't learn until you launch. Dan Norris is the author. And for more information on this book, go to redpodcast.com/67. You'll see the episode notes, links to the book. I want to leave you with one more thing. He has a list of 14 business rules to live by, and one of them is to outlearn your competition. If you're listening to this podcast now, you are doing just that. Congratulations for outlearning your competition. A lot of people, they think, I've already got my MBA. I've already started a business. I'm working in the business. I know all I need to know. And that is not a good way to sustain a business. Business is always changing. And if you're not changing with it, you're going to lose. They say if you want to keep getting what you're getting, keep doing what you're doing. And that's not true unless nothing around you changes. If you want to keep getting what you're getting, you have to constantly change. And if you want to do better, outlearning your competition is one of those things to do.
One more business rule to live by that I want to mention as well out of the 14 that he gave, and we mentioned this kind of earlier, but it was test every assumption. And I just think that's really valuable piece of advice for you to take away today is just don't make assumptions about your customer, about your product, about what people need. Go out there, test it, create a rapid prototype, whatever you have to do, get it out there, and then make decisions based on that.
Don't assume.
Don't assume.
If you have questions or comments about freedom businesses, building your own business in a way that you want to, that makes you money and allows you to do whatever you want to do, Laurel and I are more than happy to talk to you about that. You can reach out to us at redpodcast.com. While you're there, if you have episode suggestions, we would love to hear them. You can help us build the Red Podcast community by going to iTunes, searching for Red Podcast, leaving us a review, and also telling your friends about this podcast. We're trying to get a group of entrepreneurs together that are educated, that are executing, that are doing things the way they should be done, making changes in the world the way they should be made. And you can help us do that. We appreciate you. We'll see you next time on the next episode of the Red Podcast.
You've been listening to Red Podcast, Real Entrepreneur Development. Subscribe today using iTunes, Stitcher, or via RSS at redpodcast.com.